The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Lunch and Learn series. Tim Baker's my name and I'll be working with you obviously over the next couple of months. I just wanted to do a quick sound check to make sure that I'm coming across loud and clear. Now the way I want to do that is if you look over on the right hand side you'll see a question box. If you just open it up please, and could you just type in the word clear, and that lets me know that I'm coming across loud and clear. All right, people are off and running. Well done. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Erin. Thanks, Marie. Thanks, Nathan. To Neil. Thank you. Okay. Thanks, Jade. Excellent. Okay. Well, that's good to hear. That's reassuring. Otherwise, I'm talking to myself for for an hour. Now, the other thing about that question box, at any stage, if you've got a question that you'd like to ask or a comment, and I will at different times ask you for those, just go to that, just go there and just type in your question. Now, you can do that at any stage. In other words, don't wait until the end, because I'm not going to leave a sort of a 10 minutes for Q&A. I'd rather make this as interactive as possible. So the whole idea is, of course, to type in your question the moment that you want to ask it. So that's the first logistics that we've got out of the way. Now, some of you I know have logged into your learning platform, and I'll explain that in a little bit more detail with you in the moment. But basically, the Lunch and Learn series centers around 6 one-hour webinars, which are spread out over 2 weeks. We find that 2 weeks is just enough time not to forget what I've been talking about, but also to give you a chance to implement what you wanted to try to implement. So, and now those 6 webinars, if at any stage that you think, oh, I can't, you know, I've got another commitment or I've got something else, no drama, because what we're doing is we record these sessions, and what happens is that I upload them to the learning platform. So in the learning platform right now, and you wouldn't be aware of it unless you logged into the learning platform in the last, 10 or 15 minutes, I put a copy of the slides, which you're going to see today, obviously. So you'll have a copy of the slides, you'll have a copy of the recordings. So if any stage you've missed something, that's the place to go. But having said that, when you get that email from me, it's important to register for every webinar, whether you're going to attend or not, because what that does is it automates a number of reminders and that sort of thing. So it's really important to register for all of those webinars, regardless of what you're doing at the time. But obviously, if you've got something else that comes up, you can go to the learning platform and obviously pick up on all those details. Now, we've got a fairly eclectic group. We've got public sector, private sector. We've got lots of different groups of people involved in this. But I think one thing is certain: all of us, of course, have to have and should have regular performance and developmental conversations with the people that we lead. And ultimately, that's the common thread. And I think what we're trying to do in the webinar is give you more confidence and skill in how to conduct yourself with those conversations. And of course, of each module, there is a different topic on that. So let's take it a little step further. And what I'll do here is I'll just put up on the screen for you a little bit of an overview about what the topics are. And obviously we're going to be talking about the authentic leader, and I'll talk about that in a bit more detail shortly. In Unit 2, I'll talk about the 5 conversations framework. I know some of you have been exposed to this. It's a framework which I'm proud to say is really taking the world by storm, and I mean literally. We've got people who are sending me emails all over the world saying how useful and effective it is. So I thought, well, if I can give you a framework for that. Now, obviously, one of the things I'm going to recommend, if you're not already doing it, is to have regular check-ins with your team members. Not every week, it's not necessary, but perhaps every fortnight or even monthly at the very minimum. Because if you don't have a framework to work from, you're going to be in a bit of strife in terms of implementing what we're going to suggest. Now, you might say, well, what are we going to talk about in those meetings? Well, the 5 conversations framework is a framework that I think you'll find very useful. In Unit 3, we're going to talk about coaching, and in particular, I'm going to use the GROW model. And what I'll do during that session is give you a free coaching session, and just to exemplify how powerful GROW is. In Unit 4, I'm going to look at the visioning and purpose conversations, and this is really important because often what we do is we underestimate what we're doing, and we don't always create the link between what we're doing, which might be like a mindless report or whatever, and an end result. So it's important to have these visioning and purpose conversations, and I'll talk a little bit about that in Unit 4. In Unit 5, I'm going to talk about encouraging conversations to build commitment, and it's one of the big complaints that people will, and you may share these complaints, that will say to me is that I don't get enough appreciation, or I'm not appreciated, or whatever in the workplace. Now, that's pretty easy to rectify by having short conversations on that. So it is an important conversation. And I guess the law of averages in Unit 6 is that everyone in this webinar, I'm sure, has got somebody who they just don't have the perfect working relationship with. All right, could be a boss, could be a co-worker, could be a colleague in another team, it could be a stakeholder. So having good relationship, having good relationships is critical, and I know no other way than to have conversations. You can't have a really meaningful, deep working relationship with someone via email, for example. So I'm going to talk about a few tips on how you might actually start to deal with that in a little bit more effective way. Some of you might say, well, I don't want to have a decent working relationship with them. Well, in that case, then you're not going to do it. But in a lot of cases, if you depend on that person in terms of the work that they do, then it's probably a good idea to try and initiate an opportunity to develop a good working relationship with them. All right, so there's the program, and obviously every fortnight I'll run through all that with you in great detail. Now, let me talk about the learning platform for a moment, because I know some of you haven't logged into that, and that's, you didn't have to, but I know some of you did out of curiosity. So let me just close out my slides for a minute, and let me go to my learning platform. And let me show you how it works, if I may. So what you can see here is, so when you click on the link that I sent you, and I'll send it to you again at the end of this webinar, what you do is, of course, you type in your email address, right? And you also put in your password, which you would be aware of would be welcome 20, no spaces, capital W, welcome 20, and make sure you click the little box there and remember it so that you don't have to keep messing around wondering what that is. And then, of course, you can click on sign in, and what that will do is it'll take you to your portal. Now, you'll notice I've got a myriad of lunch and learn programs here on mine, so obviously you'll only have one, and yours is actually this one here, which is maximizing performance with better conversations. And if you click on that, you can it'll take you to your portal, and you'll notice there that I'll just click on there for a moment so you can see the distribution. Whoop, I missed that one. Let me try again. Preview, that's what I want. Wrong button. So even I get it wrong. Now you'll say, okay, let's start. And you'll get an opportunity to click on that little arrow up here. Sorry, there we are. You click on this little arrow up here, and you can see that there are 6 different parts. Now those 6 correspond with the webinar, so basically they're the units. So what you do is you can click on any of those units. So let's just click on explore here, which is of course unit 1, being an authentic leader. So let me just click on there, and it'll take a little while, a little fire up, and then we'll get into it. So now, there you go, it's on your screen now, and I'll just scrolling down for a moment, because what I've put in each unit is a couple of things that are important to you. For example, I've given you the slides and recordings. So down here, you can click through and go next. Now, obviously, I haven't put the recording up because I'm doing it right now, but you can already see you've got the slides in there. And then you've got lots and lots of other activities to look at. So, you know, if you want to get the best out of the program, obviously the idea is to go into your learning platform, preferably straight after you've met with me, and then there's some activities to do and some exercises to do. I've regurgitated some of the slides and made some comments about it, but what I've done basically is pick the key points out of the webinars. Now, it's not going to take you hours and hours on end. It's just getting you straight to the key ideas that have come out of the webinar. So essentially, that's how it looks. So has anyone got any questions about that? Just type them into the question box. I'll be happy to respond to those if you've got a question at this stage about that. All right, so there might be some people typing away, but let me go back to my slides now, and let me get back to where I was. And let me now move on to the topic proper. So let's go and look at what we're going to do. So what I want to do today is cover 3 key points. So what I try and do each unit is cover 3 critical points, because obviously in an hour you can't do much more. Now I want to talk about why conversations are important. I think you probably understand why they're important, but I just wanted to give you my perspective on that. I want to talk about some of the barriers that people face when they're having conversations with people. And then I want to talk about the 5 pillars of authentic conversation. So ultimately, it's about being an authentic leader. And when we throw this term around, but what do we actually mean by it? So we'll talk about that as well. All right, so let's talk about conversations, and it's all about the conversation. And let's just talk about a couple of the key points here that are important. Just let me make a couple of key points. Now, one of the things that I wrote a book in 2015 with Aubrey Warren, and the book is called Conversations at Work. And in that book, both Aubrey and I suggested to the reader that organisations are conversations. So ultimately, if you think about it, regardless of what your organisation is, whether it's public sector, private sector, or not-for-profit, regardless of what it is, it's a bunch of people working towards a common cause who are having hundreds, perhaps thousands, tens of thousands of conversations each day. Most of them are task related on a whole bunch of different topics. So you could conceptualize an organisation as a bunch of people having a myriad of conversations about a range of topics each day. So in other words, conversations is really the lifeblood of an organisation. So really, if you think about it, an organisation is really a series of conversations. And some of those conversations are long, some of them are short, some of them are structured, some of them are spontaneous. Some of them are done in the lunchroom, some of them are done in the boardroom, some are boring, some are interesting, and it goes on. So really what we're trying to do in the Lunch and Learn program is to improve the quality of the conversations that we have, not right across the organisation obviously, but certainly from your point of view. So good quality conversations are sadly lacking. That's the truth of it. Technology has very much taken over a lot of what we would normally do, which is get on the phone or talk to someone face to face. How often have you received an email from somebody when you probably wondered, well, why didn't they just come and talk to me? They were just sitting across the hallway from me. So we often use, for example, emails as a way of having a substitute, very poor substitute, I might say, for conversations. Now, a lot of you may be thinking that conversations is an art form. I want you to forget about that. It's not an art form. I don't want you to believe that conversations are an art form, because they're not. Now, having difficult conversations, some of the challenging or courageous conversations, which we'll cover, I have no hesitation in saying to you, do require some skill. But the fact of the matter is that you and I are used to having conversations every day on a range of topics. We are well practiced at having conversations. So to suggest that there's some great art form to it is misleading, and it also discourages us from making an effort to try to improve our capacity to have good conversations, because it's supposed to be an art form, and I'm not very good at that sort of thing. So we've got to forget about that and just concentrate on improving the quality of our conversations as such. So it does beg the question, have we lost the need for conversations? No, we haven't. I actually think they're more irrelevant now than they ever were in the history of work, because nothing can replace them. At this stage, IT cannot replace a meaningful conversation. And so I believe they're critically important, particularly for you, because you're a leader, and being a leader, it is your vehicle to be able to achieve more than you perhaps would otherwise. So it's certainly not a lost cause, that's for sure. Now, I often hear people saying to me, oh, look, I don't have time to have conversations, I'm too busy. Well, I would say to you that conversations is your work. I mean, I'm not suggesting there aren't other things that you should be doing, but at the end of the day, from a leadership perspective, conversations is your work. Now, I'm not talking, of course, about chit-chat and idle gossip. I'm talking about genuine performance and development conversations. It is your work. It's the nature of what you should be doing. So I think it's wrong to think that we don't have time for it. We need to make time for it. And obviously, one of the things I'm going to suggest is that you create this time by having this regular check-in with your team members. If you're not already doing it, it's critically important, and we'll talk about that in more detail. Now, colleagues of mine in the United States, Barry Posner and Jim Kuzner, who are great authors, wrote a fantastic book called Credibility. I'll just show you what it looks like. I'm not suggesting you go out and buy it, but it's a fantastic book. And this book itself talks about an interesting phrase. They talk about leadership is a relationship, which is quite intriguing. So if leadership is a relationship, then the question that I have, a rhetorical question for Kuzner and Posner, is how do we have a relationship? And you know what? There's only one answer to that, and that is this: one conversation at a time. It's impossible for you to have a working relationship, or any sort of relationship, quite frankly, with another human being unless you engage in conversation. I mean, sure, you might argue I can have a conversation via text, or I can have a conversation via email, but not really, not to the extent that it should be, where you can actually influence people to do things differently or continue to do what they're already doing. So I love that phrase, leadership is a relationship. So I want you to keep that in mind. So all I'm trying to do here for you is just set the scene to let you know what this is, what my philosophy is, if you like, about conversation. So if you've got any questions, type them in the question box or comments. I'll be happy to hear them, and I will certainly deal with them. No one else gets to see them, by the way, except me in this case. So I'm the only one that gets to see your comment or question, and of course I'll deal with it the moment I do. All right, moving right along. Now, I would say to you that there are two types of conversations that go on in the workplace. We could divide them up into two. We have task-focused conversations, and we have people-focused conversations. Now, task-focused conversations, of course, are conversations to do with the project or the work that people are doing. Now, so they're conversations about where are we up to in the project, what's happening with such, and so on. Now, the other type of conversations are the people-focused conversations, and the people-focused conversations are the performance and development conversations that I've been referring to. Now, I would estimate, and I don't have any hard data on this, but I would estimate that 80% of the conversations that you have, and most people in organisations with other people, 80% of the conversations you have at work are task focused. And that means that there's probably at most 20% of the conversations that are people focused. Now, obviously, some conversations are a bit of both, and that's why that's that middle area there. But I think that what I'm trying to do in the Lunch and Learn series is elevate up the list of priorities, the need for people-focused conversations, if that makes sense to you. So that's what I'm trying to do. Now, you might say to me, well, what should be the ideal, should it be 50-50? Should it be whatever? Look, I think the reality is you're going to have more task-focused conversations and people-focused conversations at work. But I would like to think that you can increase both the quality and the quantity of the people-focused conversations, because let me make this point, for you to be a more effective leader, for you to be able to influence your people more effectively, the reality is it's going to be the people-focused conversations, not the task-focused conversations, going to make the difference. So this is a leadership program, and it's a leadership program around the notion of getting the best out of people. And the best way to get the only way to get the best out of people is one conversation at a time. All right. So let's look at some sobering statistics, and let's just look at what's happening around the world in relation to conversations. And I'll just go through this relatively quickly, but I'm just trying to paint a picture here for you. And one of the things, we've got 79% of organisations worldwide struggle to engage and retain their employees. That's from Deloitte's. Sure, it's 6 years ago. So there's a real issue around retaining good people in the organisation. You might say that what we're going through with COVID-19, it might be that options are limited in terms of people leaving, and it's probably likely that there'll be a bit more stability in organisations because people haven't got an option to pack up their bags and move across the road. But still, it's disturbing. 86% of organisations believe they don't have the adequate leadership pipeline to address these problems. So people all over the world are concerned about the need to build leadership capability. So I guess what I'm trying to do through this is to build leadership capability through having better, meaningful conversations. 90% of leaders rely on their own ideas, according to DDI, rather than seeking involvement from their team. Worse still, 89% of leaders fail to listen or respond to the interpersonal cues from those they interact with, which is quite damning. So that's because leaders aren't having enough conversations with people. And a conversation is a two-way process, isn't it? It's a dialogue between two people. So obviously you can see that I'm painting a picture about why we're doing this topic and what we need to do about it. Disturbingly, only 5% of leaders are effective at building trust in their interactions with team members. Only 5%. So again, if you want to build high levels of trust with your team members, then it's done one conversation at a time. If you look at those people that you have a high level of trust with in your organisation, I'll guarantee to you it's because you have regular get-togethers and dialogue about a range of different topics. And so conversations are critical to trust. 60% of employees felt that their self-esteem was dented by their leader at work. 60%. These people would rather do almost anything else than sit through a performance conversation with their boss. Now that's that's the sort of where the boss is basically telling them, what they're not doing right. Although they did acknowledge that a good boss with excellent interaction skills could enhance their productivity by as much as 60%. So basically what people are saying is we want to have more conversations, and we're willing to do that. 79% of employees who quit their job will cite a lack of appreciation as a key reason for leaving. Now, that's why we're looking at the encouraging conversation in this model, because frankly, this is an issue for people, that people will often say that they're not appreciated. 65% of North Americans report that they didn't receive any recognition in the previous year. Now, they may well have, but the bottom line is they didn't think they did, or at least 65% didn't think they did. So you can see that there's some real issues around the world in relation to conversations. It's cross-cultural and it's a real problem. And so you're in the right place, because we're wanting to learn how we might improve our capacity to communicate with the people that we lead. So what are the barriers that are likely to get in the way? Because obviously there are going to be some barriers, because if they weren't barriers, the reality is that we'd all be doing exactly this, and I wouldn't be in a job, I wouldn't have any work to do, because everyone's just doing what I'm going to be suggesting. So have a think about some of these barriers. One of the barriers that we might have, and these aren't necessarily in any order, and I might say that they can fluctuate, but one of the barriers that we might have in our conversations is inattention. In other words, it's often a euphemism for multitasking. So I'm tapping out an email at the same time I've got someone talking to me about whatever, and I'm saying to that person, I'm listening to you, and while I'm saying that, of course, I'm typing out an email thinking that I'm being hugely efficient, getting two things done at once. But in actual fact, the person doesn't think I'm listening to them, because I'm not giving them 100% attention. So obviously the conversation's not going to be ideal. But secondly, obviously the email that I'm typing out is probably not going to be the best email that I've typed out either. So what I need to do is do one of two things. I either need to turn and leave the email and give the person 100% attention, or say to the person assertively, I need to finish this email, and as soon as I've finished it, I'll come over and have a chat to you about it. All right, so that's how that works. So inattention, and the great management consultant Warren Bennis said the biggest challenge of the 21st century is the management of distraction. We are bombarded left, right, and centre with information and distraction. Our task and our challenge is now to make sure that what we focus on is what we focus on, and that includes conversations. So I would say to you, you need to focus on conversations. So if you're having a conversation, be there. Another barrier that comes up regularly is that there is a restricted information channel. So you'll often hear people saying, you'll get told on a need-to-know basis, or they might say no news is good news. I'm sure you've heard that before. So what we actually need to do is to communicate more information to our team members. Now, I accept there are some things that are confidential in your workplace, but the reality is there's a lot of things that you could be sharing with people that perhaps you elect not to for whatever reason. But just remember that the people that that you lead think just as you think about your boss. They think that you know more than you're letting on. In other words, by you not sharing information, you're being evasive. And so I would say, as a rule of thumb, if I've got no information, then I'll share that. And I'll just say, I don't know anymore. I just want to let you know that since yesterday when we discussed such and such, I don't know any more than what I knew yesterday. And then the person hopefully will believe you, and it's right. Now, the other thing about the restricted information channels, frankly, is that if your people have got the same information that you've got, barring some confidential information, but if they've got the same information that you've got, guess what? They'll have the same perspective as you'll have. And if they've got the same perspective that you've got, they're likely to perhaps understand, appreciate, and agree on a range of different issues and how they should be dealt with. Now, one of the biggest challenges that I find in the world of work is the lack of feedback. It is a serious problem. And look, there's a lot of reasons, and particularly it's not just constructive feedback either, I might say, it's positive feedback as well. We just don't give enough feedback. You might be saying and thinking, sitting there thinking, well, my boss doesn't give me much feedback. Well, that might be true. But that's not an excuse for you not to give feedback to the people that you lead. So I strongly recommend that you start thinking about doing that. And feedback should be a two-way conversation. In other words, it's not just about you in a monologue letting the person know what you thought of the work that they did. So I remember working in a, and I know we've got some people from local government here, and I certainly won't mention the organisation. In fact, I'll say this, it's none of the organisations that are in this webinar, but I do remember turning up one day to an organisation I was working in, and I remember talking to this person who'd only been in the job for about 6 months, and I said, how have you settled in? And she said to me, I don't know. And I said, what do you mean you don't know? And she said, my boss hasn't told me. And I said, would you like me to go and ask them to give you some feedback because you've been here for 6 months? She said, that'd be wonderful. So I went in there, I knocked on the door, and I asked the boss, her boss, I said, do you remember, let's call her Jill. Do you remember Jill started 6 months ago? And the boss said, yes, I do remember Jill, yep. How's she settling in? And he said to me, wonderfully well. And I said, would it be possible for you to give her some feedback about that because she's wondering? And I'll never forget it. He looked at me and he said, oh, I can't do that. I'm thinking to myself, why couldn't he possibly give her feedback? There must be something going on that I don't know about. I mean, are they having an affair or what's going on? Anyway, I said to him, do you mind if I ask why? And he said, oh, look, I couldn't do that because if I give Jill feedback, I'll have to give everyone feedback. So feedback is an impediment to good communication and conversation. So another big barrier in organisation is a culture of not asking questions. Every single one of you who are with me today, you all have some sort of an expertise. You might have done a trade, you might have done a degree, I'm sure you've done some course of study to get to where you have. And the reality is that any learning opportunity is really an opportunity for you basically to answer questions. That's why you learn anything, to learn how to answer questions. So all of a sudden, we're talking about conversations. If you show me a good conversationalist, regardless of what sort of conversations we're talking about, a good conversationalist is somebody that's able to ask questions. And the questions that they ask are open-ended questions, which will precipitate more than a yes or no. It's the questions like why, what, when, how, which, and who. Those sort of questions will elicit more than a one-word answer. But of course, if you've been trained to answer questions, then it's very hard all of a sudden to learn to ask questions. And I would suggest to you that leaders are in the business of asking questions, not answering questions. All right, so it's really a question of you learning to ask good questions. And we'll obviously cover all of that in due course. Now, another problem or barrier around conversations is the is too much formality. And of course, if you have your conversations in your office, if you've got an office, then you're going to feel extremely comfortable because it's your office, it's your territory, if you like. But just remember that the other person that you're having the conversation with doesn't feel as equally comfortable as you do because it's not their territory. So just be aware that your best conversations will not actually happen in your office if you have an office. And of course, a meeting room is fine, but also getting outside the office can be even better. I've got a client in Melbourne, for example, who takes a trip around. They probably wouldn't be doing this now when the process that's happening down there, but she takes her people for a walk around Etihad Stadium when I think it's called different, but this anyway, one of the stadiums down there. It takes them 20 minutes to get around the stadium, which is plenty enough time to be able to broach a subject. She gets a bit of exercise at the same time. So get out of the office. Why do you have to have your conversations in your office? There's no necessary need for that, and it does stifle formality. Now, you probably thought, well, when's he going to start talking about email? Well, let me start talking about it right now. Do you know that the average person spends 2.5 hours on email a day? And you might say, wow, I wish I only spent 2.5, but that's the average that people spend. Now, I don't know about you, but I got 200 emails in my inbox this morning, and I would say that 95% of them weren't relevant. But anyway, I'm certainly not a Luddite. I think emails are wonderful, and I couldn't be running the Lunch and Learn without it. But the truth of the matter is that we often will have conversations via email, will we not? And we'll justify that and say, oh, I'm just trying to document it. What you need to do is, before you put fingers to keyboard, is I want you to think, should I be having this conversation with people, or is doing this via email the best way? Because email is an asynchronous technology, which basically means that when you send someone an email, they will decide when they respond to you or if they will respond to you. So in other words, it's not a very efficient medium to be having a conversation with someone. So I would encourage you to reduce the number of emails you have and to get out of your chair and go and talk to the person. And if they're remote, then get on the phone and talk to them via phone. You'll get more done in less time, and you'll feel good about yourself for having done it. So don't just fire off emails mindlessly to people. Have the conversation with them, which is really useful. Now, of course, if we have a lack of role models in the workplace, this can be problematic as well. So what I suggest is that if your leaders are not having good conversations in your workplace, then it's probably likely to permeate throughout the organization. So look, there's not much you can do about that. Perhaps you could suggest you put them in the next Lunch and Learn series with me. But apart from that, the fact of the matter is they're modeling the behavior, and therefore people are picking up on those cues. And all I'd say to you about that is that you just need to make a decision to become good at this and put some effort, time, effort, and energy into it. And of course, one of the big reasons that we don't have conversations, or we avoid them, is the fear of emotion. And of course, I'm going to be talking about this in the Lunch and Learn series. The reality is that we often are fearful of opening up a can of worms. And so by opening up a can of worms, we think to ourselves, this could be a problem. So we won't broach the subject. But the reality is the problem will not go away. Have you thought about this? I mean, it doesn't go away. I mean, you might hope it goes away, but it won't. So you need to bite the bullet, so to speak, and have that difficult conversation with the person. And the best time to do that is first thing in the morning, because otherwise you'll be worrying about it all day. Just get in there and do it. I'm going to give you some skills on how to do it. But I mean, the fact is that you've just got to jump in and do it. They don't go away. So that's another big barrier. I'm sure you'd be aware of that. Now, the office layout. Now, there's not much, again, you can do about this as a physical barrier, but it's interesting that, 20 odd years ago, people were designing office layouts so that, there were no doorways. And the whole point of that, or the reason for that, was to try to develop more open communication. But in actual fact, it's done the opposite, because what we've found is, of course, is if you have a conversation with someone in an open office environment, the reality is there's 10 other people that will hear the conversation. So it's very hard to have a conversation with someone when you know that there are 10 other people listening in. So it's often a barrier. And of course, by the time you book the meeting room, it's not worth it. So this is a huge barrier. But if it's worth having a conversation about, it's worth planning to do that. So folks, there's the 9 barriers. There's probably a bunch of other barriers around that. Has anyone got any questions or comments? Just type them in the question box. Just go to the question box, open it up, type it in. Hopefully, usually on the first session, everyone's a bit shy and reluctant. By the, later on in the lunch and learn, I won't be able to shut you up. But, if you've got any comments or questions, I'm really happy to read them. So go for your life and share them, and I'll certainly keep my eyes out for that. Okay, now I want to change tack a bit and finish by talking about this concept of authenticity. And what I've done is I've designed a model around 5 pillars of authentic conversations. Sorry about that. So these are the pillars, and what I'll do is I'll run through these pillars with you, and what I'm asking you to do is to concentrate on these for the rest of today and hopefully for the rest of your time at work. And these pillars, you'll notice at the bottom that there are task focused, so there's 2 pillars that are task focused, and there are 3 pillars that are people focused. Remember, I talked about task and people conversations before. And so these pillars, of course, do prop up the degree of authenticity that people might pick up from you in conversations. Darren's just said, thank you, Darren. If I could give you a prize, I would, being the first one to ask a question. Thank you, Darren. I think, Darren, you've been involved in a Lunch and Learn series with me before, so you know the scoop. Oh, hello, they're all coming in now, and we've got one here from Kelly. So let me go through these. Darren asks, any advice on how to have conversations about goal setting without it being seen as a KPI for performance management in a negative context? I think, Darren, what I would do is probably, look, the first thing that I would say about this KPI conversation is that you shouldn't talk about 5 KPIs in the one conversation. That will just drain all of the energy out of the room. I think what you need to focus on is 1 KPI, and then you need to talk about it in terms of your own expectations, and the trick for you is to try to get the other person to talk about it. So for example, I might start by saying, one of the KPIs, as you'd be aware in the work, is timeliness in terms of report writing. And I just wanted to talk with you about that. And then you might want to explain why it's important, because obviously other people are relying on that information. And you then want to get the other person to talk to you about that. All right, so that's really, really important. So look, we'll keep talking, we'll keep hammering away at that, Darren, but the thing is not to raise 6 or 7 things in the one meeting. Kelly asks, I found this interesting, assessing my own manager against what's been explained to us. My manager is considered a very good manager, very in uppercase, and it makes sense that everything you're telling us are his common traits. Great, so you've got a role model to copy, Kelly, so that's fantastic. You should be very blessed, because not all of us have got a good manager. Um, and I'm sure I could open up a can of worms if I ask people to talk about people that perhaps don't fit the bill of what Kelly's talking about. So yeah, Kelly, get into a conversation about your boss, about what you've been learning today. Might be a really good start too. Okay, thanks guys. So let's go through these pillars quickly. So setting expectations is the first pillar. And what I would suggest to you is to think about these questions. What are your expectations of your people? Are you absolutely crystal clear in your head what you expect? Now, you might think that's a bit of a weird question. Of course I am. Well, are you really? I mean, are you absolutely crystal clear about what you expect of the people that you lead? Now, how can you possibly manage expectations and be authentic if you don't know what you expect of the people that you lead? Question 2 is, have you then communicated those expectations to your team? Now you might say, yes, I've done it. Have you done it over and over again, one-on-one and team-wise? Because you need to explain, and just because you've explained it to people doesn't mean that necessarily they understand it, which is the third key question. Do they understand the expectations? So coming back, Darren, to your question, what I'd be suggesting that you do is maybe some of these questions need to be responded to in the meeting that you're talking about, that you have to have. So do people, and they don't think because you understand it, they understand it. It's not always the case. And then just because somebody understands the expectation doesn't necessarily mean they accept it. They might think it's well beyond the realms of possibility, or I've got 10 balls in the air that I'm juggling at once, so why would this be more important? So really you need to, if people don't accept the expectation, they're certainly not going to meet it. Now, are the team members committed to meeting those expectations? That's another thing, because remember, most people have got 10 balls in the air juggled at once. Why should they be more committed to your expectation or your task than anybody else's? One of the things that you can ask people, and it's not an aggressive question, but if something's really important to you, ask people and just say, can I get your commitment to get this done by the close of business today? Now, that's not an offensive question. It's an authentic question. And the other person then you're looking for three things: a nod, a grunt, or a yes. Now, if you get a nod or a grunt or a yes, then you're halfway there to getting it done, because people don't want to fall back on a promise that they've made to you. On the other hand, if they and ah and they can't commit, then the question then for you is to talk to them about why they can't commit. You see, so commitment is, don't just assume that people are committed. It's not, ask people for their commitment. It's certainly if it's important, then why wouldn't you ask for it? And just remember that you need to be giving people regular feedback about how they're going against those expectations. If you haven't been giving regular feedback, then you're going to get yourself into strife. Now, Darren was asking about that KPI question before. And if, for example, I was in Darren's position and I probably haven't given much feedback on performance up to date, then I would probably say, in a very authentic way in that meeting, look, I apologize. I should have been giving you more feedback than I have, and I haven't. And I realize now that I should, and I'll commit to doing that. All right, just get it out there. But of course, if you have, then you wouldn't need to say that. Are you supporting your team members with those expectations? That's important. So are you really, supporting them, giving them the resources they need, the support they need, the coaching they need? Because obviously, if you don't do that, then it's likely that people will occasionally fall short of the mark. So there's the 7 questions around expectations, folks. So let's now move on to the second pillar, which is challenging unhelpful behaviour. Now, I'm going to spend a bit of time in the lunch and learn on this, but the question that I've got to ask you is this, and I think, I just want you to think about this question. So what are the consequences of not challenging unhelpful behaviour? Have a think about that for a moment. If you don't challenge unhelpful behaviour, then you are not actually doing anything that's going to work in your favour. Because first of all, they won't think it's unhelpful behaviour because they've had no feedback on it. So that's a consequence, negative consequence. Another challenge might be that they will then other people around in your team might think, well, why isn't he or she challenging so-and-so about that behaviour? That's their job as a leader. And it goes on and on and on. You've got morale issues and all the rest. So I'm really going to concentrate and want you to concentrate on having those courageous conversations with people, because frankly, it's part of your job. I'll help you with it, but the point is you've got to be courageous enough to do it. You can't avoid it. Now, pillar number 3 is around establishing a trusting relationship. Now, if you want to develop trust in your team, it boils down to 4 key elements. Now, if you violate any of these elements, then this is research based as well, if you violate any of these elements, what you're going to be doing is you're going to perhaps lower the levels of trust between an individual or perhaps several individuals. So if you need to be treating people fairly, not only treating people fairly, be seen to be treating people fairly. This is critically important. And of course, we all like to think that we treat people fairly. But what's the perception that other people might have of you in that regard? We need to recognise people's positive contributions. Do you say thank you to people? Do you give them positive feedback when they have exceeded your expectations? You need to give people clear directions of what you expect of them. And Darren, it comes back. I'm picking on you, Darren, but you're one of 2 people. Kelly's the other one. I'm not going to pick on Kelly. She was just making a comment, but I would just say to you that when you do sit down with this person, make it crystal clear to them what your expectations of them are, if you haven't already. And then I might preface it by saying, look, I apologise if I haven't made this clear, but here's what I expect. And you might think, well, why should I do that? Isn't it obvious? No, it's not always obvious. And the other thing that I'd suggest to make sure that you maintain a good trust in your team is to support their development. Doesn't mean send them off to training courses or lunch and learns or whatever, although that's nice. But really, I think the key thing there is to support them by listening to their feedback, coaching them when needed, and all of the good things that you're going to learn in the Lunch and Learn series as we move forward. So there's 4 key things that I think you can keep in mind. Bear in mind, you've got these slides. You can review them later. Now, pillar number 4 is, how do I show appreciation? There's that word again, appreciation. Well, the simplest way to show your appreciation is to say thank you. Thanks very much for dealing with that irate customer the way you did. Thank you for speaking up in the meeting this morning. Someone had to do it. Thank you for hanging back for an hour late to get that report written. It's not difficult to do that, but unfortunately, there's not much of that goes on. True, I'm sure you'd agree. So showing appreciation for authentic reasons. You're not doing this as a manipulative tool, all right? You need to be genuine about this because people can fake a phony a mile off, as you know, and we're not trying, because, you can, in a short-term way, manipulate this to get, better productivity. But I'm talking about a genuine attempt to show appreciation. We do know from the research that if people feel appreciated, it'll increase daily attendance, it'll decrease tardiness at meetings, We will find that people will follow systems more effectively. It will reduce conflict in the office environment or in the outdoor environment, wherever you happen to be. It will increase appreciation, and it will actually rub off on the end users of the product or the service that you provide. All right, so there's a lot of good reason for doing it, and it's not just about manipulation. So just could you possibly find 3 things to look for this afternoon and say thank you? Could you do that? Even if you're working remotely, could it be possible that you could just, again, you could use an email and just say thank you. Just wanted to thank you for the good job you did this morning in this morning's Zoom meeting, whatever it might be as such. Pillar number 5, so we're on the home stretch now. Pillar number 5 is build on the future. And I would say to you that any conversation that you're having with people, the authenticity about it is really related to the future. The only reason that you're having these people-focused conversations, frankly, is because you either want to retain a certain behavior and make sure it is sustainable for the future, that's the positive, or you want to change it for the future. And what that means is not to wallow around in the past and get all caught up and he said this and she said that. The key point is that you're having these conversations with people because you're focused on the future, not the past. Of course, you might talk about critical incidents in the past, but at the end of the day, it's about the future. All right. So folks, are there any questions about or comments about those pillars? If I can just come back to the, yeah, okay. All right, if you're typing away, keep going, and if you're not and you want to, go ahead, because we've got a couple of minutes before we wrap up. Now, every time I give you a lunch and learn, when we do one of these webinars, and remember there's 6 of them, I do set you some homework. It's not theoretical homework, it's really practical stuff that you can apply straight away. And here's what I want you to do from today. I want you for 2 weeks, that's until the next time we meet. And remember, we always meet on a Friday, 2 weeks. And for 2 weeks, I want you to find one opportunity every day to say thank you and then to say thank you. I want you to do that. You might say, oh, I'm already doing it. Well, do it twice. You say, I'm already doing it twice. Do it 3 times. You will find some incredible outcomes. You'll probably get a strange look the first time because people, and if you do get a strange look, it's probably because they haven't heard it from you before. So give it a shot. It works extremely well. So that's your homework. So it's not onerous, but it's effective. I can assure you of that. And of course, go into your learning platform this afternoon. You've got all the information you need to go in there. I will post up the YouTube. I'll upload the video to YouTube and then post it online for you. If you want to review it again, you're more than welcome to. It's part of the package. I look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks and look forward to the opportunity to do that. So, folks, I'd like to say thank you. Have a wonderful weekend. And don't forget this afternoon, your homework is to do to say some thank yous. And isn't that nice? Kelly said thank you to me. So Kelly, that's not, you got to do more than that, but thank you. Thank you for thanking me. But I mean, you've got some to do, but thanks. I appreciate that very much. All right, folks, have a great weekend. We'll catch up in a fortnight. Thank you and goodbye.